The Holy Bible, it holds a lot of information, and like quantum physics, as the quantum physicists say, you cannot truly understand what is going on within the material. Now, I cannot tell you why you cannot fully understand the entire Bible, but some of it is written deliberately to be interpreted, like Revelation, which is why I will not be using Revelation. But first, we shall tap into Isaiah. Isaiah. Isaiah is one of those that have clear messages and clear narrative. One of those is depicting Egyptians and Ethiopians. And as we see here, it says, Isaiah has gone naked and barefoot 3 years for a sign and a wonder upon Egypt and upon Ethiopia. So will the king of Assyria lead away the captives of Egypt and the exile of Ethiopia, young and old, naked and barefoot, and with bodies exposed to the shame of Egypt, and they will be dismayed and confused because of Ethiopia, their expectation, and of Egypt, their glory. And the inhabitant of this coast will say in that day, Behold, such is our expectation, to whom we fled for help to be delivered from. Now, the full context of that entire passage is about the Jehovites, the Jews, converting the Egyptians and the Ethiopians into the Jewish religion, which is funny because a lot of people I hear say that the Jews never believed in converting anybody into their religion because it was a culture, not a religion. But clearly, I mean, it's in the Bible that they want to convert other people into the religion. But before that, let's think about something more important, which is what is secretly written in this passage, reading between the lines. It's obvious that they thought that the Ethiopians and Egyptians were one and the same, and that one is the expectation and one is the glory. And so Ethiopia is the expectation and Egypt is the glory, based on their opinion. And so this connection is made first and foremost in this passage. But I will show you that there are other passages. But before we go there, let's first discuss a couple things, which is that Ethiopia and Egypt, for the most part, that is being discussed here, is really Sudan and Egypt. And so when they say Ethiopia, don't think it's the far Ethiopia or the entire continent. In this specific context, they're talking about Sudan and Egypt. The next verse compares Nineveh in Iraq to Egypt and Ethiopia, and he says that they belong to Amun. So it says, Nineveh is laid waste. Who will pity her? Whence shall I seek comforters for thee? Art thou better than no Amun, which means the city of Amun, which sat upon the Nile stream's waters round about her, whose rampart was the sea, and waters her wall? Ethiopia and Egypt were her strength, and it was without end. Put and Libya were among thy helpers. So again, you see this mixture of the word Ethiopia and Egypt, both being used as part of the same network, part of the same system. And just like the verse that we just read, it's assumed that the people within Ethiopia are somewhat more real than the Egyptians, and that the Egyptians are somewhat more successful than the Ethiopians. And let's read it again. And they will be dismayed and confused because of Ethiopia, their expectation, and of Egypt, their glory. So we should understand that because of Ethiopia their expectation, and of Egypt their glory. And this is discussing them in a religious context, in that the religion of Ethiopia, the tradition, the culture, everything is where they basically scoop their ideas from, and they take a lot of their cultural, their traditional, their heritage, their love, their philosophies, medicines, life, everything is taken from Ethiopia, and then it is glorified, it is extended, becomes this giant reimagining in Egypt of Ethiopia. And so Ethiopia, though itself being a fascinating place, I mean, and the Bible mentions that several times, Egypt as a system, as a network itself, is seen as the glory of the Ethiopians, the place where no man will deny the Ethiopians have excelled beyond what they are typically capable of. And you will see that in other verses, they make a clear thing like the Arabs are on the other side of the coast. This coast, as it mentions in the one that I just read, this is the Ethiopian coast. This is where the Ethiopians dwell, whether you're talking about Egypt, whether you're talking about Put, whether you're talking about Libya, this is where the Ethiopians dwell. But on the other side of that coast, what you will find is Arabians. What some people don't understand, speaking of the Arabs and the Ethiopians who come from different sides, is that the Ethiopians had already moved past Egypt. Ethiopians, meaning the people of Sudan specifically, had moved past Egypt and were moving and taking over some parts in the areas of Israel and the Sinai. And the Arabs, the Bedouin, is who they're talking about specifically this time, who are of those random deserts, not necessarily a specific place. Otherwise, it would have been called Saba, which is where the Arabs are today, Yemen and those areas. But the Bedouins of the desert, they came and broke into Israel according to the Bible. And so it says here, and Jehovah stirred up against Jehoram the spirit of the Philistines and of the Arabians who were besides the Ethiopians. And they came up against Judah and broke into it and carried off all the substance that was found belonging to the king's house, and also his sons and his wives. And so you can see here again, when people talk about how the Ethiopians, oh my God, they don't overlap with they do. And that's in the Bible. That's in many places in the Bible where the Ethiopians are mentioned over and over again as a very important part of history. But I will admit that the Arabs are too mentioned, and Arabs in this case doesn't mean what is an Arab today. It's talking about the Bedouins. You have to look that up, what a Bedouin is. Now, it's hard to tell exactly what the Bedouins would have looked like or even been like in the past, but we do know that the Bedouins themselves still live in that Sinai area in between Egypt and Israel. And the reason why they live there is obviously because of multiple things like this that were happening that led them to come to those regions. And of course, like I told you, there were Ethiopians who were scattered all over that coast. I've shown you how Taharka and his descendants used to exile Ethiopians into the Sinai areas. The Sinai areas are very close to Israel. And of course, there was all these other people who talked about the Ethiopians that were stationed in Gaza. And yes, Gaza, the real Gaza, the one that's close to Israel. These histories that come together are not supposed to be taken in the religious context, because here they're just using it as a help of a narrative, just like when they mention Taharka. It does not mean that Taharka is just only to be taken in a religious sense. In fact, we know Taharka existed as a real person, and that the Bible must have introduced him as a character because of his reality. So, as we see here, it says, "And he heard it said of Tirhaka, king of Ethiopia, Behold, he has come out to fight against thee. And he sent messengers against to Hezekiah, saying, Thus shall ye speak to Hezekiah, king of Judah, saying, Let not thy God, in whom thou trustest, deceive thee, saying, Jerusalem shall not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria." So you can see there a whole thing going on with Taharka, a story for another day. But the point is, Ethiopians were mentioned. Taharka was fully aware of Israel. Taharka sent troops and ordinary people who were from Ethiopia into Israel. And this is before Jesus. And so, there's parts where in the Bible where people say, oh, Jesus looked like the ordinary person in Israel. Okay, but what did the ordinary person of Israel look like? I mean, depending on who you ask, you're going to get different answers. I mean, I've even heard that some people say that one of the people of Israel were like Native Americans, which is ridiculous. But in reality, you can't just say a normal person from Israel. What does that mean? Are you talking about... Okay, let's look at different perspectives for 1 second before we go back to the Bible. Are we talking about Ethiopians? Are we talking about those people? Are we talking about the people that are mentioned, which are called Niger? Are we talking about those people? Are we talking about Bedouins? Are we which group are we talking about? And of course, when you talk about the native group, they're not really explained what they look like outside of them being compared to other people that are around. And the people that are around that they're explained are Ethiopians. What is that? And you can see in this verse, Assyrians are kind of seen as something else, something far away. And that is a true fact in the beginning. Continuing the theme of these close regions to Israel, we read another verse that says, "But now, thus says Jehovah, thy creator, O Jacob, and thy fashioner, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed thee. I have called thee by name, thou art mine. When thou passest through waters, I will be thee, and through the rivers, thou shalt not overflow thee. When thou goest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon thee. For I, Jehovah, am thy God, Israel's Holy One, thy deliverer. I give Egypt as thy ransom, Ethiopia and Saba for thee." Now, again, you can see here, this is talking about the whole thing with Egyptians and Ethiopians and Arabs who were constantly at war with the people of Israel. But you can see that they're seen as I don't know if the word troublesome people are, meaning that they're always at the door of Israel. And now Israel is talking about conquering these places. And of course, there's a lot of mention of this in the Bible. Most of it is conquering it physically, even though some people would argue it's talking about conquering it religiously, which is the same in some cases in the Bible. But you can see here, I give Egypt as a ransom, Ethiopia and Saba for thee. Now, Saba is Yemen. In one other part, he mentions more of this wanting to conquer Egypt and all the other places related to Egypt. So he says, "He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape, but he shall have power over the hidden treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his heels. But tidings from the east and from the north shall trouble him, and he shall go out with great fury to destroy and to slay many. This discussing a specific person, but we don't need to get into the details. I just want to show you again, you do not get Egypt without Ethiopia. You notice how Libyans are mentioned sometimes? They are very important, and obviously we can go into Herodotus and how he points out that the Siwa area oasis, the Siwa oasis, was filled with Ethiopians, and that half, 50% of the population came from Ethiopia, meaning they spoke and had the culture of Ethiopians, and the other 50% came from Egypt, and they spoke and had the culture of the Egyptians. Now, it's not obvious when he says this that the Ethiopians he's referring to are necessarily from which specific area of Ethiopia, but he does mention that there are Ethiopians. And this does help when people say there were no Ethiopians deep in Egypt. The Siwa area right now is a Berber land, and it's only got like, I don't know, it's got a small number, a small population. But the fact that we have people going that far back into Egypt who say that area right there had Ethiopians. And then we look at the population today and they're Ethiopia related. They're not pure Ethiopians. Tells you that there's been a significant change of the population in that one area. So why is it that that one area that we know for a fact had Ethiopians, as written by Herodotus, why is it that it has changed, but the rest of Egypt has just stayed the same in its entire history? Except maybe the few exceptions which they accept, like, Cairo, maybe they'll accept some cities have had, outsiders come in. But for some reason, the rest of Egypt is just this, place where no one really left or no one stayed. And we can see even here, even in the Bible, they tell you of deep, deep migration from Bedouins to Libyans to Ethiopians. Everybody's moving, everybody's alive. Now, I know some of you are going to be like, I've already seen this before. And this is why I kind of hate the way I speak, because I kind of can ramble and give away certain information that I'm going to use for future videos. And I'll give like a piece of information and someone will think, oh, but I've already heard that. But in real life, what's happening is that I mentioned it a little bit. I didn't give the full context. So let's first go into the verse. It says, and it came to pass as soon as Rehoboam had established the kingdom and was strong, that he forsook the law of Jehovah and all Israel with him. And it came to pass in the 5th year of the king Rehoboam that Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem, because they had trespassed against Jehovah with 1,200 chariots and 60,000 horsemen. And the people that came with him out of Egypt were without number Lubim, Sikkim, and Ethiopians. And he took the fortified city which belonged to Judah and came to Jerusalem. Now Shemaiah and the prophet came to Rehoboam and to the princes of Judah that were gathered together to Jerusalem because of Shishak, and said to them, thus says Jehovah, ye have forsaken me, therefore have I also left you in the hands of Shishak. Then the princes of Israel and the king humbled themselves, and they also said, Jehovah is righteous. Again, this further talks about the histories of the people. By the way, you'll notice also how Jehovah makes this claim that the Egyptians and the Ethiopians need to return to him. In other words, saying that they are one of his original people and they need to return to him. They need to turn back to him. They need to abandon Amun and return to him, which, again, the Bible's been argued for thousands of years. I'm not trying to tell you what it means, but I want there to be mentioned that that is written down as something that's there rather than this disconnect between the Ethiopians and the Israelites and all these other people as if they're completely distant people that have nothing to do with each other and no one should care because, they have nothing to do with each other. And of course, even in the Bible, you see here mentions of the Bedouin tribes, which, by the way, we don't need the Bible. We have other things that the Bedouin tribes moved into the Sinai areas, whereas a lot of other tribes are seen to already be there, like the Egyptians, like the Ethiopians. The most dramatic of these battles is the battle between Zerah the Ethiopian and Asa the Judah. And you can see here in this, it says, walls and towers, gates and bars, the land is yet before us because we have sought Jehovah our God. We have sought him and he has given us rest on every side. So they built and prospered. And Asa had an army that bore bucklers and spears out of Judah, 300,000, and out of Benjamin that bore shields and drew bows, 280,000. All these were mighty men of valor, and there came out against them Zerah the Ethiopian with an army of 1,000,000 and 300 chariots, and he came to Mareshah. Then Asa went out to meet him, and they set the battle in array in the valley of Zapatha at Marashah. And Asa cried to Jehovah, his God, and said, O Jehovah, there is none able besides thee to help between the mighty and him that has no strength. Help us, O Jehovah, our God, for on thee do we rely, and in thy name are we come against this multitude. O Jehovah, thou art our God. Let not men prevail against thee. So Jehovah smote the Ethiopians before Asa and before Judah, and the Ethiopians fled, and Asa and the people that were with him pursued them to Gerar, and there fell of the Ethiopians so many that they could not recover themselves, for they were rooted before Jehovah and before his host. And they carried away very much booty, and they smote all the cities round about Gerar, for the fear of Jehovah came upon them, and they spoiled all the cities, for there was much spoil in them. They smote tens of cattle also, and carried off flocks in abundance, and camels, and returned to Jerusalem. Now you'll notice that the Ethiopians are not being chased all the way back to Ethiopia. They're actually being chased to Gerar. Now, Gerar is actually still in Israel. As you can see, it's right next to that area written Simeon. Now, what is Simeon? Well, Simeon is actually one of the 12 tribes of Israel. And you can see there, Simeon is right next to Judah, or inside Judah, inside the Israeli thing. And it was founded by Zerah the Ethiopian. So, and of course, with hundreds of thousands of men that he brought, this shows you that the Israelites or the people in Israel had some deep mixtures and deep whatever with the people of Ethiopia based on the Bible. not based on me, based on the Bible. These Ethiopians, like I mentioned again, would be something closer to Sudanese people or even Egyptians. And so we're not talking about anything else besides that right now. But to go back, Zerah, the Ethiopian who founded these people and had a mainstay in the area, is one of the reasons why Ethiopians have a real claim of a right to return to Israel. Again, you can't delete these verses. These are real verses within the Bible. And this verse alone would be good enough. But there's so many other places where it makes it obvious. And that's why I laugh again when people say, what did Jesus look like? They say he was an olive skin, blah, 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 because he looked like everyone back then who lived in that area. That's because you don't understand that none of these areas looked like one thing. And why would they? They were trade centers. They were filled with war. There were Assyrians, Sumerians, Indians, Ethiopians, Libyans, all kinds of people fighting back and forth. And you have to sort of piece through the evidence to see which group is what. Before I go on, and I know I hate doing this ramble thing, but I have to do it. I don't know when we gave up the idea that E1B1A is the only way that someone can be black, but somewhere along the line, someone controlled us to make us think that. But we'll get back to that another time. Let's look at the Ethiopians. So finally, we'll finish with this verse. He who calls the waters of the sea and pours them upon the earth, Jehovah is his name. Are ye not as the children of the Ethiopians unto me, O children of Israel? It is the oracle of Jehovah. Did I not bring Israel up from the land of Egypt, and the Philistines from Caphtor, and the Syrians from Ker? Behold, the eyes of the Lord Jehovah are upon the sinful kingdom. Now, the interesting thing about this is he's talking about people who are from the original places. So the Philistines come from Caphtor, the Syrians come from Ker, and he's saying that Israel comes from Egypt in this sense. And the best part is that he starts by saying, are ye not as the children of the Ethiopians unto me? Now, I don't know how else to interpret this outside of him saying, are you guys not the children of Ethiopia? And then he says, didn't I pull you guys out of Egypt? Like I pulled the Philistines from Caphtor and the Syrians from Ker?